Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about Home Richmond, which is a predominantly residential, but a really mixed-use scheme, precinct-wide redevelopment on the corner of Church Street and Bridge Road in Richmond. Our client was Home Residential. They're a build-to-rent operator, and this is their second completed project in Victoria. The project was built by HASA, and it was a true pandemic project. We went on site just before the first lockdown, and the whole of the process was done through, however many it was, 6 or 7 lockdowns. That was very challenging for them in terms of procurement. Obviously, no particularly offshore items that were coming in, so windows, joinery, etc. And we collaborated with NH as the retail architect on the ground floor retail component. The project consists of about 15,000 square metres of retail with a Coles supermarket as the anchor tenant. There's about 3,500 metres of commercial office space, 368 built-to-rent apartments, of which 13 are dedicated affordable key worker apartments under an agreement with the City of Yarra. And there's about 2,500 square metres of internal residential amenity. So quite a large amount. That's about 7.5 square metres per apartment. The site sits right in the middle of Richmond on the corner of Bridge Road and Church Street. And we're kind of sandwiched between the Swan Street precinct to the south, Victoria Street to the north, and it's really a revitalisation project for Bridge Road, which is, as we know, seen better days. Hopefully this is a catalyst for redevelopment. It's a large, generally flat site of about 13,500 square metres, and it has 4 very distinct street frontages with quite different urban conditions. The Richmond Plaza shopping centre, as was in pretty dire straits, very closed off from the community, rundown retail, no connection to the wider precinct, at-grade car parking, making kind of hostile pedestrian interfaces. And so we started by looking to open up the site as much as we could. We wanted to create connections to the residential precinct to the northwest and the north. We wanted to reconnect through a series of retail laneways to Bridge Road to the south. And we wanted to really open up that Church Street frontage, which has always been pretty closed off. And with the police station and Macca's on the other side, there's really not a lot happening there at the moment. So it used to be just a big retail block, totally closed off. There were 2 underused plazas on Bridge Road, which really had no kind of urban love to them, and a series of car park entries and loading bays to the north and the west. So you can see that the ground floor plane has been completely opened up. There's a whole series of laneway connections through to, I don't have a clicker, but through to Arc on the northern side, 2 laneways that come into an open plan market hall at the ground floor. The supermarket is obviously the big grey block in the middle, but there's a series of laneways that connect through to Bank Street and Cameron Street on the north and the western sides. So we're really trying to pull people in from those low-rise residential precincts to the north and the west. So you can start to see how the Heritage Bank building, which is the white block in the middle on Bridge Road, is now flanked by 2 new activated laneways with potential for that building to then be redeveloped itself. It's not part of our scheme, but that can trade out into those laneways in the future. A series of small-scale retail market hall tenancies at the front and activated streetscape around Church Street. The residential entries are deliberately spread right around the precinct, so each of the buildings above on the podium have a totally separate address, and contrary to many kind of large-scale urban resi developments, they're quite small, they're quite discreet. They give the tenants of each of those buildings a real sense of their own address. They're all actually differently addressed with each of the 4 street names, and that's really quite unusual for this scale of building. It's much more kind of almost a European approach. So in actual fact, at the top left corner, the blue lobby to building A is the largest building. There's about 180 apartments off that small scale lobby. It's also a mix stacked vertically. So there's a single retail basement car park for the supermarket and the associated shops, and also for wider Bridge Road area in the basement. The retail and the market hall with an atrium connecting through to bring natural light in, and the supermarket on ground floor. And then there's 2 levels of residential parking above that before you get up onto a landscape podium. Parking rate's quite low. It's about 0.36, 0.37 for the residential but there's a lot of bikes. There's more than one per apartment. Commercial facing Bridge Road, and then at the northern end, which I'll talk to in a minute, there's a large amenities block, which obviously makes the most of the northern aspect and the northern light, and then a series of separate residential buildings above. Because it's a supermarket, it needs a car park. We just tried to make it a nice car park. Not much more to say than that. Much more importantly, we've tried to push the building back off Church Street as much as we could. We're trying to get an apron of activated hospitality and trade-out space for all the tenants on Church Street, which is now starting post-pandemic to come to life and be a bit more vitalised. And then working with NH on the retail fit-out, it's very much a Richmond-esque industrial urban kind of market hall with flexible trading spaces. So big steel hoods that mark the tenancies, and then the traders move around below that. And just off the top of that image is that atrium. Level 2, we're wrapping amenities to the north. I'm going to speed through now. 4 blocks with large landscape terrace. Trying to connect the blocks visually. So you can see diagonally 2 lots of sawtooth roofs reflecting the Richmond context, and then 2 larger concrete precast buildings to the other side. The streetscapes are all reflective of each of the local areas and pick up on Richmond character. So Bridge Road fits in with the heritage streetscape. Small scale brick interventions, more complex detailing, heroing the bank building and opening up to the laneways, but fitting into the streetscape. Moving around onto Church Street, large brick podium, 2-story street wall, 6-story above, again fitting into the Richmond context, and seeing how those shapes then fit in the skyline above. I'm going to cross through some of these. Coming around onto Cameron Street, much smaller scale. The building really tears down to the bottom. And building E on Bank Street is a much smaller intervention standalone. That's the key worker dwelling, picking up on local textures and colours and fitting into the residential streetscape to the north. And then once you get up on the podium, totally different experience. It's like a little village, 4 separate buildings, low rise, capturing views to the church to the south. And then the amenities offer is much larger than a typical multi-res retail. So there's a whole home built to rent offering with a concierge service, and it's a upscale hospitality hotel style offer, and all tiered around the back on the northern side. So residence lounges, working with local designers. Is that my time?
It is.
Okay, I'm going to skip through the images.
There's so much amenity, it just takes so long.
If I can just have 30 seconds. Typical building floor plan for building C. I think it's very important to talk very quickly to the different apartment types that are a model for built to rent. So in the middle at the top, you've got a typical 2-bed, very large bedrooms, which allow for a study and work from home space for 2 separate shared professionals renting. 3-bedroom options. There are actually quite a lot of families with young kids that have moved in, which is an interesting demographic change. And smaller 1-beds in the middle at the bottom of the page.